Yeah, this video's coming up late, but what can I say? You have your traditions, I have mine. And speaking of traditions, it's time for another annual Black Friday double feature. Those of you who are new to the Romney's Review show, the Black Friday double feature is more or less a tradition I have on the show, where every Black Friday I take a look at 2 movies instead of just 1. And it started when I looked at Life of Pi and Rise of the Guardians, and I kind of continued it through last year, and now I'm continuing it this year. Last year was a triple feature, that was a bit of a mess. And I kind of learned my lesson for that one, so here I'm going to give you a bit of a choice. If you want my review of The Theory of Everything, that'll come up right after the intro. If you want my review of Interstellar, click here to skip straight to it. That way, if you just want to know my opinions of Interstellar, it's right there. And yeah, with that out of the way, if you haven't clicked there already, let's begin this episode of Romney's Reviews. Okay, first up, The Theory of Everything. Now, growing up, I pretty much knew next to nothing about Stephen Hawking. I mean, most that I've been told is that he's considered the smartest man alive. And it's also a case that I've only really seen satirizations of him in shows like Family Guy or The Simpsons, where pretty much all you really could glean from it is that he's a really smart man who is in a wheelchair and has to use a computer to talk. And that was pretty much where it began and ended. And it wasn't until I saw this film that I knew that I learned about his theories, about his work, about his pursuit of the theory of everything that's supposed to bridge quantum mechanics with Einstein's theory of relativity. And to be honest, it's kind of a shame how little I actually knew about the guy. However, the key thing here is that this film is not a film about a man's contributions to science. That's what they may want you to think, but at its heart, this film is pretty much a love story. And not just a love story, but also the story of a woman's absolute devotion to her husband in the face of absolute misery and despair. The Theory of Everything is based on the memoir by Jane Hawking, the now ex-wife of Stephen Hawking, and it chronicles the relationship from when they both met and fell in love when they were attending Cambridge, kind of going through Stephen's struggles as he's succumbing to ALS, and then ending shortly after the publishing of A Brief History of Time, which was one of the books that put Dr. Stephen Hawking on the map. The first act of this film is very slow, and it's also lacking in the cinematography department. And when it comes to just the way the visuals look, everything kind of has this weird glow about it. I mean, I can understand you're trying to evoke the feeling of nostalgia for days gone by, but here, it didn't really come across as a biopic, but just a typical romance film in the vein of films like About Time. Once we're past the initial romance arc, we really begin to see the heart of Jane and Stephen's relationship. Gone is the golden halcyon glow, and instead we're given just this stern realness. I mean, at first it was like kind of all like nice and happy, but here we're just given a very realistic depiction of what's going on. I mean, yeah, you see the relationship, you see that they were still kind of caring for each other, but it's not treated as a legendary biopic that's romanticizing someone, and it's not treated as some sort of epic love story either. It's given a fairly realistic approach. As such, this film is very reminiscent of the French film The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, since not only do we see kind of the nature of their relationship, but we just kind of see how Stephen's mindset kind of changes as he's slowly succumbing to ALS, and just how he slowly loses all the different things he used to be able to do in his youth. You just kind of slowly see how he changes as a person. Speaking of mindsets, major acting kudos to both Eddie Redmayne and Felicity Jones. I mean, Eddie Redmayne really shines here when it comes to using only his body and only his face to convey emotion. And really, at first it was like a case of, oh, well, it's gonna just be kind of like an internal monologue thing, but no, he's actually got some real acting skill. Because even when doesn't have like the computer thing, but is just having to convey emotion and intention with solely his eyes, but still having kind of an expression frozen there, it feels real, and it actually was really incredible to watch just how dedicated he seemed to be when he was performing this role. At the same time, Jones manages to give a performance that balances the devotion, the frustration, and the internal conflict of a religious woman who's married to a scientist. That's not like an underlying major theme of the film, but it's more or less subtext that kind of informs the character and kind of informs the way she acts and the way she carries herself, which makes some of the more emotional moments of when, and it's not so much of a spoiler, but kind of when you have the line in A Brief History in Time of saying, to know the mind of God, you understand why Jane Hawking would be excited at that prospect. You understand the subtext, and it informs the character, and Jones manages to have that come across very well without coming across as some sort of radical Christian, which is refreshing. When it comes to the remaining technical aspects of the film, it does have some good visual moments, but a lot of them don't really occur until the end of the film. There are some other unique visual moments, but they mainly come across as a desperate attempt to remind us that this is a film about a scientist, kind of going in the vein of films like A Beautiful Mind. Really, much of the strength of this film comes from the acting of our two leads. That's really what ties this whole thing together. Overall, this is a pretty good film that tells a very well-written emotional story. It does feel a bit slow at the beginning, and I did find kind of the moments at the beginning where they're trying to paint Hawking as the socially awkward but charming nerd as a little bit desperate, but I still really enjoyed it. If you like films like A Beautiful Mind or even The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, then you'll enjoy this film. You just have to be willing to sit down and pay attention to it, as there are some subtleties to the characters and to the story that if you're not paying attention, you might miss and might not understand why certain moments are significant. Again, not a complete game breaker, but just something that I feel I should throw out there is that take the time to actually watch and really watch this film. Don't just put it on as background noise. That said, The Theory of Everything gets a 4 out of 5. Okay, now that we've taken a look at a film about a man who posited that the universe began from an expanding black hole, we now take a look at a film that deals with subjects like wormholes, time distortions, and black holes. This is Interstellar. Going into this film, I heard a lot of people compare this film to 2001: A Space Odyssey or Contact. And really, those are some very apt comparisons. This film is very deep, very dense, no pun intended, and also just deals with some very complex science and some very complex ideas. However, at its heart, it's ultimately a story about human nature, which is really what all science fiction is when you take the time to think about it. It's all about human nature. We see a thorough explanation of what humanity would have to do if it actually got to the point where we had to leave Earth and find another inhabitable world. And not only do we explore kind of the stakes we have to go through, we explore how the science behind it would inform the decisions of the people who would actually be making such a perilous journey, and how they actually approach these various life or death scenarios. It's really hard to go into specifics without spoiling the entire film, so most that I can say story-wise is that this is a very intense, emotional journey that we take with our main character that actually has a fairly nice payoff. That said, there were some lines of dialogue that bothered me a little bit because they just came across as cheesy. Even with the really good actors delivering them, they felt very heavy-handed. I mean, you have like the line that pretty much became the tagline on the poster of humanity, like mankind was born here, wasn't meant to die here. And then you just have the later on trying to inject some other theme or idea of an abstract concept. And really, when looking at a film that's trying to be really serious, really straightforward, hard science fiction, lines like that just kind of feel out of place. More like they're just taking the subtext and turning it into context, turning it into the actual content, and really just kind of beating you over the head with it. It just felt out of place. When it comes to the technical aspect, the film looks absolutely stunning. However, we do come across a few things that can probably be termed as Nolanisms. I mean, the best way to explain is that it's stuff that you see in this film that you can tell that Nolan used in other films. I mean, to give you an idea, there are a few shades of Inception, for example. I mean, those of you who've seen Inception, you've seen the case where you have like the street folding over, and given that this actually deals with wormholes, it does make a little bit more sense in this film. But I'm guessing it's a case that Nolan was really fond of that kind of imagery, and so he decided to incorporate it into Interstellar. I mean, yeah, it makes sense story-wise, but it was just kind of a case of, okay, Nolan, we get it. You like that trippy optical illusion sort of imagery. We also see one particular shade of The Dark Knight Rises. Now, again, this is a nitpick, but it's a minor nitpick that still just really bothers me. And I've seen other people try to emulate it, but not really well. It's kind of a case where you have two characters talking. One of them is sitting down, and then they say something while they're sitting down, they cut to the other person talking, and then they cut back again, and they're suddenly standing, and we're not given any audio cue or any indication of any kind that they were standing up during the take. I mean, I can understand, say, if you have an actor standing up and the actor that you're currently cut to is changing eye lines. That would be a way to indicate it. But here, with no indication. You see them sitting, you cut, then you cut back, they're suddenly standing up. It's very jarring, very annoying, and just... Again, it only happens once in this film, it only happened once in The Dark Knight Rises, but it's still annoying. Speaking of editing, Nolan seemed a little bit fond of fades this time around. This is kind of where you just have something fade to black, and then you have the following shot fade up. I mean, I can understand using fades if you're making like a clear act break, but there were just some instances where he kept fading to black, and a lot of these fades were just really close together. It was kind of like Nolan really liked using the fade tool while editing this film, and then at some point you realize, okay, that's enough fades, I should probably stop and not use them anymore for the rest of this film, but forgot to kind of take some of the fades out, thus having too many of these fade transitions close together. Again, not a complete deal breaker, but it was a bit annoying as well, and I think even Nolan kind of understood that, which is why he didn't keep using the fades during that particular chunk of the film. Aside from that, there's not really much else that I can say about the film that other people haven't said already. It's a well-executed piece of hard science fiction. It's visually stunning and thought-provoking without talking down to its audience. So if you haven't seen it already, and you enjoy films like 2001: A Space Odyssey or Contact, then I highly recommend you check out this film. All of that said, Interstellar gets a 4.5 out of 5. So that brings this special Black Friday double feature episode of Romney's Reviews to a close. Have you seen Theory of Everything? Have you seen Interstellar? Let me know what you guys thought about either film in the comments below. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Oh yeah, before I go, check out Geek News Reviews and Opinions. Click here to go to an episode of Geek News Reviews and Opinions to see what this podcast is about. It's a real fun thing. Me, Aldo, Adam, and Alex, we talk about a bunch of movie, game, entertainment-related stuff. It's a good time, so yeah. If you want to spend a couple of hours listening to geeks geek out, well, check out Geek News Reviews and Opinions. Click on my face.